Today we are going to start human anatomy. Now, it can be studied in two ways. First one is gross anatomy and second one is systemic anatomy. What's the difference between gross and systemic? As the name suggests, gross means it includes everything, and within a moment I'll let you know about it. And systemic means we study systems in a serial or order. Now, what does this mean? In if we consider a human body, for instance, this is a human body, a very rough diagram. Now, if I take this hand and I study first the bones of the hand, which would be first the humerus. I'm not gonna draw all of it. I'm just gonna draw the bone of the arm. Now we'll be studying the muscles on top, then we'll studying arteries, veins passing through it, and finally the epidermis covering it on top, the epidermis layer. Now if we start with the arm and study the arm as a whole, this is known as gross anatomy. So gross anatomy books are based on sections on human body such as upper limb, thorax and abdomen, lower limb, the neuroanatomy, and that is how it is divided. In systemic anatomy, first we start with studying bones of full body, then we study muscles of full body, and then arteries, then veins, nerves, then the outer layer finally. So this is with respect to full body. We study bones of full body, then we study muscles of full body, then we study artery, vein, nerves, and then the complete as a whole. Now this is systemic because we study in systems. So what are these systems called? Now study of bones and the joints can be also called osteosyndesmology. And in thorax and abdomen we are gonna also study in gross anatomy the internal organs. As you know, we have organs internally. So we are going to study organs inside thorax and abdomen, and likewise we are also going to study organs over here after we study the muscles. So now it's osteosyndesmology, muscles it's myology, organs sphancnology, artery veins cardiovascular, then nerves we're going to study peripheral nervous system in this. Yes, there is a section also called as the nervous system, in which we study neuroanatomy, the nerves related to brain, all the cranial nerves. We have 12 cranial nerves. This is just the starting, so don't be overwhelmed. We'll be covering all of it and it'll make sense soon. So peripheral nervous system, it has all the nerves of the body including motor, sensory, and their division. And after we study nerves, we are gonna also study the lymph nodes and the lymphatic system of our body. And then there's nothing left. The outer layer we study in histology. It's the skin basically, skin or made up of two layers. I'm just going over the basics. You may know this or you may not, but there's nothing to worry. We will cover all of this: epidermis and dermis. So Easy. This was the basic division of how we can classify human anatomy. Now, gross anatomy, you got a heck of it. Now, how will we study? We are gonna covering the systemic part of human anatomy. So I will be starting with first osteosyndesmology, myology, sphancnology, nervous system, cardiovascular, peripheral nervous system, and then lymphatic system, uh, order wise. So first, osteosyndesmology. Now, what are the sources which you can use to study osteosyndesmology? Now, if you are studying MBBS abroad and you are an Indian student, so I presume that you are studying the way of in the way of systemic anatomy. Let me zoom. Systemic anatomy. So this is without a choice your way of studying. Now you may have a book of your university, like I am studying in Vinnytsia National Medical University, so I have a book known as Osteosyndesmology, provided by the university. Now second, if you uh, want to have a reference book, you can also take Inder B. Singh Osteology. It is also based on systemic anatomy and it covers osteology as well as syndesmology. So there will be no problem if you are referring to another book to study the systemic anatomy. Now, moving further in anatomy, now we are going to talk about anatomical terminology. In anatomy, we study terminology in two languages mainly. First is English and second one is Latin. Why do we need to study in Latin? Because it is kind of universal language, and just like the scientific names of the any species, it is also recognized everywhere in the world. So Latin is also studied. Now, coming to the anatomical position of human body. What is anatomical position? Let's look above. Now, anatomical position, you notice two things here. First, the person is standing straight. Second, his palms are facing forward. Now, this is the anatomical position of human body. It's quite simple. We are going to discuss about 6 terms here, or 6 to 8 terms. Now, anterior. As you may all know, it is the forward side of the body. Posterior, behind our back or behind the body. And then there is superior, above, inferior, below, lateral, towards the outer side of body, medial, towards inner side of the body. I'll be covering them in more detail, like anterior. If we talk about our chest, where is it in the human body? It's on the anterior side. And if I talk about the gluteus maximus, the hips muscle, and it is on the posterior side of the body. Simple. Now, where's the head? It's superiorly located. Where's the feet? It's inferiorly located. Now, if where is the little finger of hand? It's more medial, more towards the human body. And where is the thumb of hand? It's more lateral, more on the outside. Now, what is proximal and distal? Proximal, if we take a center of human body right over here, uh, this is, we are taking over the umbilical, where the umbilical cord is attached basically. This is not recommended scientifically, but you can, for just learning purpose, understand by taking it from here. Now, anything that is close to it is proximal, anything that is far away from it, it's distal. So if we're going to talk about the thigh, what is it? It's close to it, so it's called proximal. Now, if I talk about the calf or the leg, where is it? It's on the distal end, right? So after covering the anatomical position of the body, I hope it is. Now after covering the anatomical position, we are gonna cover the anatomical planes and anatomical axis. Anatomical plane and anatomical axis. Now what are the three planes of human body? As you can see here, it's sagittal plane, it's, you can say, dissecting, or it's in between the right and left half of body. Sagittal plane is any plane which is passing longitudinally through the body. So this is this plane. If I can show you by marking, okay, I hope this is clear. Now sagittal plane, what is median plane to be sure? Sagittal plane is any plane passing longitudinally to the body. Median plane is that sagittal plane which divides body into equal right and left halves. So median plane is also sagittal plane, but it divides into equal, where sagittal plane is not can be uniform, and if it is uniform, it is known as median, and it can be non-uniform as well. Now once we are done with the sagittal plane, now we'll be talking about some other plane, which is the coronal plane. Coronal plane has a second name, which is also known as frontal plane. Now let's draw its boundaries. It's this one. Remembering frontal plane is easy if see coronal plane. What does the coronal, what, where it is derived from? It is the crown. We wear crown on our forehead, and the frontal is also related to our forehead. In Latin, this is just to make concept easy. In Latin, frons is known as forehead. Now frons, forehead, and the plane passing parallel to forehead is known as frontal. So it's the trick to remember, frontal plane passes parallel to the forehead, and it's dividing the body into anterior and posterior parts. So that was basic, and the third plane we are left with is the transverse plane or the horizontal plane. Now I'll draw the boundaries of transverse plane. See, here it is, and it's passing behind him. It divides the body into upper and lower halves. This is also known as horizontal plane. Simple. Now after discussing all the planes, what we are left with is the three axes of human body. First I'll draw on this diagram, then I'll show you a specific diagram for axis to make you understand better. Now what was the sagittal plane doing? We had the sagittal plane which was passing from front to back longitudinally. Now if I'm gonna talk about axis, first let's name the three axes. Sorry for this color. First axis would be sagittal axis. Second axis will be frontal axis. Third axis would be longitudinal axis. Now, as the name suggests, guessing where the longitudinal axis is not quite difficult. It passes longitudinally through him. Now we have studied in physics the xyz concept, right? Now if I draw this, this is x, this is y, and this is z. Easy. We have defined the y-axis here as a longitudinal axis. Now I'll draw another one. See, this is passing just in the middle of body from right to left. So this is the x-axis. What is known as, it is the frontal axis, frontal, and this was the longitudinal. Now we are left with sagittal axis. It is not difficult to understand. It is our z-axis. Z-axis. I know it can create a confusion because the sagittal plane was passing through here, and in this axis, in this direction, we have our longitudinal axis this time, and sagittal axis is in this direction from in the anterior posterior dimension. So we have defined our z axis, which is the sagittal axis. We can also look at this diagram to form a more better understanding of the three axes, or the plural word for this is axis. Longitudinal axis can also be called as craniocaudal. Now this is also an anatomical terminology. So our head is known as cranium, our feet are known as caudal. So this is described as our cranial end, and this is described as our caudal end. And when we talk about craniocaudal, from the cranium to the caudal, it is the longitudinal axis. Anterior, posterior, dorsoventral or sagittal. Sagittal is the name I told you just now. Dorsoventral can be from back to front. Anterior, posterior can be from front to back. The same thing. Now horizontal axis, the left, right or the frontal axis. Now the trick here is to remember planes and axes easily. Is, see, the frontal axis, nothing has changed much. The frontal plane was passing like this, and the frontal axis is also like this. The frontal plane was also passing somewhat like this. In sagittal, the plane was passing somewhat like this, but here is the longitudinal axis this time. This diagram is kind of hopscotch right now. I'll clear this all away and draw the sagittal one again. Now the plane was passing initially like this, but in this axis now we have our longitudinal axis, and where the transverse plane was passing through, I'm not drawing it right, I think. See, the transverse plane was dividing into upper and lower half. I think you can understand the diagram well. Now, the axis passing through this portion is our the sagittal axis, the z axis. If you can correlate it with x, y and z concept, it will be much easier to understand. Now the planes and axis has been covered. We can describe some commonly used terms related of the terms which we have left by now. See, we have covered some terms like, let's go through them once again. I'll write them over here. Now we have discussed what superior is. We have discussed what is inferior. We have also discussed what is anterior, also known as ventral. We have also discussed posterior, also known as dorsal, what's medial, what's lateral, proximal, near to the body, and distal. Now superficial and deep. What are these? If we talk about this hand, I'll draw it over here. First, what we have is a bone, then a muscle layer on top, then we can have the artery, vein, nerves. I'm not gonna draw it. I'll just draw the skin over here. So this is our skin on top. I hope you can understand this diagram. So what is on top? It's the skin. What's deep? It's the muscle. So deep is also known as profundus in Latin. Superficial is also known as the superficialis or superficial. Now, what's we are gonna talk about external and internal. Draw this part, ear over here. So in the outer side, this is our external ear, and inside our head there's a middle ear and then internal ear structure. Now if I talk about this structure, it is inside our head, so it is also known as internal. It is outside our body, it is also known as external. Now can this be called internal? Can this be called internal with respect to this external ear? Yes, anatomically we can call it internal, but it is not named as internal ear, it is named as middle ear, to be sure. Anything that is inside, we can name it as internal, it is internal to the body with respect to something which is outside, but we can not name it specifically. So you need to understand that. Now central and peripheral, which is the most simple one. First I'll list it and then I'll easily cover it in a second or two. You know, we have a spinal cord inside our body, and through which the nerves are emerging constantly and going to different parts of the body. So the thing which is located in the center is also known as central, and the things which are located on the outside are also known as the outer or peripheral. So these nerves are what? Peripheral, and the spinal cord which is located in the center, it is known as central. These two terms are also used to classify our nervous system. So our nervous system is basically classified into two major divisions, CNS, PNS. I know this is out of concept right now, but it'll make things much easier now. If we discuss central and peripheral over here, the central nervous system consists of brain plus spinal cord, and with anything which is outside brain plus spinal cord, the nerves, anything which is outside, it comes under the peripheral nervous system. Now we are left with two more terms, which are the parietal and visceral. Parietal and visceral. Now to give you a short hint, parietal you can learn it as upar, par, upar. It's Hindi word for above. So visceral will be anything a little deep, you can say. It's These terms are used to define a layer, a wall of a cavity or an organ. So if we talk about, say, lungs over here, I'm gonna draw a rough diagram of lungs. Now I'm gonna cover this, then there will be this. See, I've drawn two layers which are covering the lungs. The first one, which is covering, is known as visceral, and the second, which is covering it from outside, it is known as parietal. It is attached to the thoracic cavity. Now it forms the cavity, internal cavity, and the visceral forms the wall of any organ. And viscera is the term we can also use to refer internal organs. So when it is viscera, the wall covering it will be visceral. Simple now. These were all the anatomical terms, anatomical axes, anatomical planes, and what systemic anatomy was about. So I hope it does make sense. Now we'll be starting with the osteosyndesmology. Let's start. What is osteosyndesmology? I'll break up the term for you, and while I write this, you can also try to break it up on your own. Osteo, related to the bone, as what is os? In Latin, bone is referred as os. Now, osteo is bone. Anything ending with logy is definitely a study. And what is syndesmo? Now you know syn, anything joining each other. Desmo, the same thing. Desmo is used to refer to as ligaments. So syndesmo refer to the study of joints and its related structures. What are the structures related to joint? What can be possibly related? If we talk about the joint, see, this is bone and this is also a bone. I'm drawing right now a rough, very rough diagram of the shoulder joint to give you an understanding. This is our scapula, this is our humerus, and this is an articular capsule covering them. They are also attached by different ligaments here and there. So the structures which can be possibly be associated are the capsule, the ligaments, and articular disc in between. The two bones may also have a disc present in between to facilitate the movement of joint. We're going to talk about it when we talk syndesmology. And you know that when we refer in Hindi, it's known as grease. What is grease? The fluid in our joints, which people say does get exhausted when we are getting big, old, and the joints start making noises, and there's a referred pain to the joint. Now, what is the fluid present and what is it called? It is the synovial fluid. The function is basic, and I assume you understand it right now, right away, because synovial fluid is present between the joints to facilitate movement of the joint for the lubrication purpose and to reduce friction. Basically, what does the fluid do otherwise in our body? So it was the osteology. Now let me break down the term. If you want to study anatomy, just start by breaking down complex topics into the simpler ones, or as we say in physiology, the catabolism. The more you do it, the more you can form the anabolism, or the formation of concepts, the once you're clear with the basics. Now let us break up the term skeleton. It is the skeletos, which means dried. uh, it is word Greek origin. And skeleton, uh, what is the skeleton? What is skeleton? It is a complex of, or a combination of bones in our body. Needless to say, we have 206 bones inside the body. The skeleton can be of three types. If you know a little bit about embryology, you may know our body has three layers, which we have also studied in the animal kingdom chapter in class 11, and that which was the endoderm, mesoderm, and the ectoderm. Now the skeleton is basically derived from the mesoderm, or which is also known as mesenchyme. It can be of three types: membranous. First, let's go through the terms, then I'll explain it one by one. Cartilaginous, bony. Membranous. It exists in Majorly, it exists in newborn or in our fetal life. And in later stages, we either have the cartilaginous one or the bony one. And more prominent is the bony one. Now, I'll just talk about a brief concept of bone development. How is bone developed? How is bone developed? How is bone formed? There are some cells, let's just call them mesenchymal cells by now. We'll not differentiate them into various cells which are present inside the bone, such as osteocytes, osteoblasts, osteoclasts, and their functions. We are going to talk about it later when we study the histology of bone and the internal structure of bone. Now, these were some cells. It form a membrane. To give a better understanding what membrane is anything which is thin, pliable. It's not as hard. You can think of your skin as a membrane right now. See, it's just like it. It's kind of skinny layer present, then it hardens. How? The deposition of ground substance and fibers take place. What comes into picture? The ground substance and the fibers. When they, and majorly the hyaluronic acid as well, when these things get accumulated inside the membrane, then it's the thing which is formed is cartilage. Now, cartilage can be of various types, which we are going to discuss later. What is an example of a cartilage? Two examples exist in our face right now. First, this bone, it is flexible, more pliable and flexible than any other bone of our body. These are the LR cartilages. And secondly, we can see our ear cartilage. We can bend it, fold it without breaking it. So these are the cartilaginous bones, or the cartilaginous tissue. Now, what is the bony tissue? All, it's present all over our body. This, the heart structure, which provides us protection and several other functions. This is the bony tissue. Now, what gets accumulated inside it more, so it becomes bone? The calcium salts and the salts of phosphate, calcium phosphate, to be more, the osin, protein, and other organic substances, leading to conversion of cartilage to bone. Now, in our body, we'll study the stages of development of bone. It is more defined in embryology, but to get a clear concept of it, the stages are: first stage, let's just name it first stage, and then the second stage, right? Now, membrane, membranous tissue, as we have discussed, becomes first the cartilaginous tissue and then becomes the bony tissue. So this is how we look at it right now. And if this is the thing we are starting with, and this is our first process, then secondary process. The bone which we can get over here is known as secondary bone. And what if I told you the membranous tissues can be directly converted into bony tissue? The bone which we will get then will be known as primary bone, because it only undergoes only one stage of development and skips the cartilaginous part. So, what are the examples of secondary bone? What are the examples of primary bone? We'll come on it later. Now, let's talk about some features of skeleton. Skeleton features. It's needless to tell you. First, let's talk about movement or locomotion in beginning, then the protection protects you, then it supports us, support or weight bearing of our organs basically. If we stand on our legs, the all the weight of our organs are is pushing downwards towards the by the force of gravity. So the skeleton supports the organs. Now, what is the biological function of our skeleton? Let's take an example. For suppose this is the earth. You may have guessed it by now. I'm drawing land and water. Now on earth there is a land. The land has everything we need, all the nutrients, anything we need. And then there are plants. So if the plants need nutrients, where will it get it from? From the land, from the soil. So this can be called as a mineral reserve for it. Similarly, in our body, we have a skeleton, then we have organs inside our body. So the bones, different bones are acting as, I'm just drawing a rough diagram over here. Different bones are acting as mineral reserve for our organs and for tissues of our body. What does it provide in mineral? To be more specific, calcium and phosphate and many other salts too, but mainly calcium and phosphate. What is the other function of bone which we will be studying later is that the bone is also involved in formation of our blood. What do I mean by blood? It forms the cells which are inside our blood. Now name some cells which are inside our blood and I'll zoom it. Till then I'll give you 2 seconds to think the cells which are inside our blood. You may have named quite a few by now, but let's talk about RBC, WBC mainly, and then the lymphocytes which are part of the WBC. Yeah, RBC, WBC, platelets, the macrophages. So these are quite a few cells which are present inside our blood. And what if I told you all of them are made inside the bone? It's quite revealing of how important the bone is in our body. So where is all of it formed? It's formed in the bone marrow of our bone. Let us now talk about the 3 stages of development. Oh, I'm sorry, 3 stages would be the wrong word. I've already talked about 3 stages of development of the bone. Now, 3 classification of development, the main ones. Phylogenesis is quite simple. It's the phylum or genus development. We develop from development of genes from lower animals to higher animals. For example, apes to human. Simple example. Ontogenesis. What is ontogenesis? It's also the development of a human being from when he is a baby to time of death. I draw the baby little wrong. Ontogenesis starts way early before becoming a baby. When there's an egg and a sperm fertilize it successfully and the zygote is formed. Zygote to the death is known as ontogenesis. Now it has two phases: the prenatal or intrauterine period, postnatal or the extrauterine period. The intrauterine when the baby is in uterus, extra external to the uterus, or the prenatal. Natal means birth, pre means before birth, post after birth. The term simplifies it all, there's nothing to discuss on it. Now we can also study development, something as anthropogenesis. So it is the comparative development, I can say, of human beings with relation to society. Now comparative development, it can involve psychological, cognitive development, and various developments. But this part does not come under anatomy. This is more of an evolutionary development. So we have covered the basics of osteosyndesmology, and now we can talk of bone as an organ. We'll be covering the bone as an organ in next video.